The heightened, surreal nature of most horror movies makes it an especially safe space for actors to try new things, and often the result can be spectacular enough to reinvent the actor's entire career. Whether that was true of these performers or not, each nevertheless proved their incredible range by ditching their archetypal casting and doing something totally different. I'm Ellie for What Culture, and let's take a look at these actors who played totally against type in horror movies. Starting with Seann William Scott, Bloodline. Seann William Scott is of course best known for playing vulgar idiot Steve Stifler in the American Pie franchise, and elsewhere his filmography is mostly populated with roles in studio comedy films. So nobody expected to see him cast as the serial killer protagonist of 2018's Bloodline, where he plays Evan Cole, a high school guidance counsellor who murders child abusers in his spare time. But the film ultimately proved that Scott has far more range than most have ever given him credit for. Despite his seemingly affable exterior, Scott brings a ferocious intensity to the scenes where Evan is killing the victims, enough that Stifler basically feels like a distant memory. It was certainly a risky cast considering Scott's prior body of work, but he absolutely acquitted himself admirably, taking the assignment seriously and delivering a performance that left everyone re-evaluating his acting potential. And then a few years later, Scott dipped a toe back into the horror villain waters by playing the leader of a right-wing extremist cult in The Wrath of Becky, and once again he knocked it out of the park. Patrick Stewart, Green Room. Patrick Stewart has had an incredibly successful and iconic career playing wise, dignified characters, most notably Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation and Professor Charles Xavier in the X-Men franchise. Everything about Stewart's presence on screen makes him perfect to play smart, composed, statesman-like leaders. But this was flipped entirely on its head for his role in Green Room. Here, Stewart plays Darcy Banker, the merciless leader of a group of neo-Nazis who couldn't be more polar opposite to the actor's most statuesque prior roles. Darcy is a violent sadist, yet rather than swing for the rafters with an intensely volcanic performance, Stewart plays the villain as eerily calm and composed for the most part. With a clinical level of detachment, Darcy decides to kill the punk band who witnessed a murder in his bar, and that's that. The result is a Stewart performance like he's never given before or since, and it ranks among his finest work to date. Amy Madigan, Weapons. Amy Madigan was widely acclaimed for her performances in numerous dramas throughout the 1980s, most notably Love Child and Twice in a Lifetime, for which she received an Oscar nomination. And though her acting profile has dipped considerably over the years, she's worked steadily for almost half a century. But at this point in her career, just about nobody expected Madigan to star in a horror film as a terrifying witch. But damn it, she just went and did it. Madigan, of course, plays the horrifying Aunt Gladys in Zach Cregger's mesmerizing Weapons, the woman or entity responsible for the disappeared children and all of the bewildering mayhem that follows. Beyond being virtually unrecognizable in the role under the heavy makeup, Madigan has simply never played a character this menacing and downright evil before. It's the last thing anyone expected from the 75-year-old actress at this stage of her life and her career, yet she gives by far the most widely acclaimed performance in the film, enough that some are calling for her to receive another Oscar nomination for her work. We can only hope. Ethan Hawke, The Black Phone. In his earlier career, Ethan Hawke was regularly cast as the handsome heartthrob, before graduating into dramatic roles where he was generally a heroic character with only a few exceptions. By his own admission, Hawke has shied away from portraying villains for fear of being typecast, but in 2021, he instantly became a genre icon through his performance in The Black Phone. Hawke stars as a mask-wearing serial killer of children known as the Grabber, and as such the character couldn't be further from the sensitive, thoughtful individuals he spent decades portraying on screen. The Grabber is conversely a monstrous, terrifying murderer with Hawke's typically calming on-screen demeanour nowhere to be found. He instead cuts a pulse-quickening presence every time he appears. In fact, Hawke was electrifying enough in the role that despite the Grabber dying at the end of the movie, director Scott Derrickson had him resurrected for the sequel as a Freddy Krueger-esque antagonist who can haunt his victims through their dreams. Sure, why not? Paul Reiser, Aliens. Younger audiences might not be aware that prior to appearing in James Cameron's Aliens, Paul Reiser was a stand-up comedian best known for his roles in films such as Diner and Beverly Hills Cop. But in 1986, Reiser went totally against this by playing Aliens human villain Carter Burke, the infuriatingly self-serving scumbag rep for Corporation Weyland-Yutani, who serves as a major obstacle to heroine Ripley throughout the film. At the time, Reiser was best associated with funny, self-deprecating characters who are generally likeable. So to see him playing a sleazy suit with basically no redeeming traits marked a total 180 from expectations. And of course, it goes without saying that Reiser knocked it out of the park. Burke remains his most iconic and recognizable performance 40 years later for good reason. While other comedians might have been tempted to play Burke as a broader caricature, there's a clinical quality to his bureaucratic villainy here that feels nauseatingly realistic. Kathy Bates and James Caan, Misery. And now for a film that pulled off two against typecastings at once. Rob Reiner's incredible adaptation of Stephen King's Misery. First and foremost, Kathy Bates was best known for playing warm, maternal supporting characters at the time of the film's release, her southern charm making her perfect for approachable, welcoming roles. But here, Bates plays murderously deranged superfan Annie Wilkes, and gives a performance so astonishingly brilliantly unhinged that the Academy handed her a Best Actress Oscar despite their historic bias against horror films. And then there's James Caan, who was well known for playing tough guys in the likes of The Godfather, Rollerball, and Thief. But as imperiled author Paul Sheldon, he plays a totally vulnerable, understandably terrified man who not a single person would describe as macho. Both actors played bold reversals on their acting archetypes, and the result is pure magic. Bates may have ended up with a well-deserved Oscar, but Caan's performance is quite fantastic in its own right as well. Bill Skarsgard, Barbarian. Bill Skarsgard gave such a brilliantly chilling performance as Pennywise the Dancing Clown in the recent It duology that it basically immediately typecast him as a very creepy guy whenever he showed up in a horror film. And this was weaponized quite ingeniously by director Zach Cregger in his terrific debut Barbarian, where Skarsgård plays Keith, a man who has apparently been double booked into the same Airbnb as the film's protagonist, Tess. Barbarian's marketing leaned into the unease surrounding Skarsgård, ensuring that when he showed up in the movie, many viewers assumed him to be the antagonist, most likely a not-so-secret serial killer. But this isn't the case at all. Keith is ultimately revealed to be a nice, regular guy who was indeed genuinely double-booked with Tess, and who meets a shockingly brutal end at the conclusion of the film's first act. This was an incredibly clever misdirect which perfectly exploited the audience's existing association with Skarsgård, only to then pull the rug out and have him die at the hands of the real threat, a mutant woman residing in the Airbnb's basement. Emma Roberts, Scream 4. When it was announced that Emma Roberts had been cast as Sidney Prescott's teenage cousin Jill in Scream 4, it was assumed by most fans that she was effectively being drafted in to become the new Sidney, and that the film would largely function as a soft reboot of the franchise. And it makes total sense. At the time, Roberts was best known for playing entirely wholesome girl-next-door types in a bevy of films and TV shows. But in Scream 4's third act, Jill is actually revealed to be the main Ghostface, driven to kill and frame herself as a survivor out of jealousy of Sidney's own fame as a survivor. It's a brilliant turn that works so well precisely because nobody expected the actress who played Nancy Drew a few years prior to now be playing a deranged psychopath. The casting quite shrewdly took full advantage of Roberts' unassuming public profile, as well as the expectation that she was being cynically presented as a younger replacement for Neve Campbell. Roberts did well enough in the role that it basically helped redefine her entire career, with subsequent roles in horror TV shows American Horror Story and Scream Queens. Harrison Ford, What Lies Beneath. What's the first word that springs to mind when you think of Harrison Ford? There's a good chance it's something like hero, considering that the legendary star has spent decades playing rugged heroes in the Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Blade Runner, and Jack Ryan franchises. Not to mention films such as The Fugitive, Air Force One, and so on. Ford is exceptionally good at portraying the put-upon hero, And so his casting in Robert Zemeckis' What Lies Beneath seemed entirely by the book at first. As Dr. Norman Spencer, Ford appears to initially be a charming, trustworthy guy who we assume will help his wife Claire resolve the whole haunted house conflict by film's end. But Norman is actually revealed to be the film's surprise villain, as the ghost haunting the Spencers' home is a woman Norman had an affair with and murdered after she threatened to expose said affair. He's a real piece of work, alright, ensuring a fun subversion of expectations for audiences and a rare opportunity for Ford to play a genuinely awful human being. A challenge he rises to with sure aplomb. Ryan Reynolds, The Voices. Over the last 25 years, Ryan Reynolds' reliable brand has been that of the quippy, somewhat annoying motor mouth who just doesn't know when to shut up, the final form of which is obviously his magnificent portrayal of Deadpool. But Reynolds entirely upended this for 2014's The Voices, where he plays protagonist Jerry Hickfang, a downtrodden schizophrenic whose hallucinations compel him to become a serial killer. There's absolutely nothing even superficially charming about Jerry. He's an unhinged, disturbed man who isn't gregarious or appealingly chatty at all. On paper, it might not sound like the sort of part Reynolds could ever pull off, and yet he did, and it remains one of his finest performances to date. It's just a shame that The Voices flopped at the box office and is rarely discussed today, despite Reynolds receiving high acclaim and himself insisting in 2020 that it remains one of his favourite films he's ever been involved with. Octavia Spencer, Ma. If you need to cast a likeable female character who won't take any crap, there are few better choices than hiring Octavia Spencer, who has enjoyed an incredibly fruitful career playing just such characters, even winning an Oscar for it in 2011's The Help. Spencer can instantly bring integrity and gravitas to just about any part she plays. But that certainly wasn't the assignment in 2019's Blumhouse horror flick Ma. Here, Spencer plays Seann Ellington, a lonely, middle-aged woman who is befriended by a group of teenagers who have little idea that this apparently harmless woman is actually murderously obsessive. Spencer's typical casting makes it easy to appreciate why nobody would assume Seann to be capable of murder, and also makes it that much more fun to see Spencer letting loose with a role this hilariously demented. Powered by Spencer's terrifically twisted performance, Ma was a box office hit, enough that a sequel was recently confirmed to be in development. Vince Vaughn, Psycho. Vince Vaughn's career breakthrough came with 1996's Swingers, which swiftly established him as a go-to for any casting director who needed someone to play a cocksure, superficially charming motormouth in a comedy. It didn't really suggest that Vaughn would be a natural fit to play Norman Bates in Gus Van Sant's rather puzzling remake of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho then, because of course, spoiler I guess, Norman is actually the film's murderous villain. Anthony Perkins was cast against type as Norman in the original film, his boy-next-door-like qualities ensuring few would have suspected him to be the real killer. Though the twist was widely known by the time of the remake's release, Vaughn's casting was no less against type, because the timid motel owner with a brutal secret seemed so far outside of his wheelhouse. To this very day, the jury remains out on Vaughn's performance as Norman, many feeling that Vaughn exudes a more obvious natural creepiness, which makes him a little too easy to finger as the potential killer. Love it or hate it, it was definitely a bold casting swing. George Clooney, From Dusk Till Dawn. In the mid-1990s, George Clooney became a megastar thanks to his breakthrough role as Dr. Doug Ross on hit medical drama series ER. Clooney's good looks and suave charm made him an instant swoon-worthy hit with audiences, enough that many likely expected him to stay in this deeply affable lane for the considerable future. But Clooney did something bold by immediately pivoting for his first major movie role, Robert Rodriguez's 1996 vampire film From Dusk Till Dawn. No, Clooney doesn't quite play the action hero here. Rather, his Seth Gecko is a fugitive bank robber who just happens to be somewhat less terrible than the vampires trying to kill him. Some of Clooney's charm certainly still shines through, enough that he's decidedly more likeable than his degenerate brother Richie. But in the wake of ER, it was immensely jarring to see him taking hostages and killing vampires while rocking a neck tattoo. He nailed it though, and smartly proved early on that he was more than a mere dreamboat. Betty White, Lake Placid. Betty White is one of the most iconic actresses of all time, and undeniably best known for her roles on sitcoms, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and of course, The Golden Girls. White had a rep for playing sweet, nurturing characters like the Golden Girls' Rose Nyland, but she turned that entirely on its head when she appeared in the first and only horror film of her storied career, 1999's Lake Placid. White plays Dolores Bickerman, an elderly widow who isn't quite the wholesome sort you'd reasonably expect. Rather, she's a sarcastic, foul-mouthed woman who has actually been feeding the giant crocodile that's terrorizing the town. Adrien Brody, Predators. When a third Predator film was first announced, many wondered which badass on-the-rise actor would be hired to play a new protagonist who could possibly live up to the hypermasculinity of Arnie and Danny Glover from the first two films. So jaws collectively dropped then when the lead of 2010's Predators was revealed to be Adrien Brody. Though Brody's acting chops were never in doubt, the man has always had a wiry frame. Hardly the sort of physique you'd expect to see for the hero of a Predator movie. Brody had never been cast in the gruff action hero role before, but to the man's credit, he clearly took the assignment seriously. Sure, he was never going to match the might of Arnie, but he packed muscle on top of his lean build and ultimately convinced as the film's cunning mercenary protagonist, Royce. He didn't match the iconic heights of Arnie or Glover, but Brody absolutely acquitted himself ably in the sort of role nobody ever imagined him playing. Kristen Wiig, Mother. Kristen Wiig is one of the most recognisable comedians on the planet, having come to major prominence through her work on Saturday Night Live, before fully breaking into the Hollywood mainstream with 2011's rom-com Bridesmaids. Wiig swiftly became a bankable comedy talent, so it was hugely unexpected to see her cast in Darren Aronofsky's 2017 horror film Mother. Despite Wiig clearly excelling at playing perky and neurotic characters in comedies, here she was cast as one of the film's villains, the intense publicist of him who eventually orders her fellow cultists to start executing hostages, while even offing a few herself. Though the character initially appears to be more in step with Wiig's traditional casting, once the veil drops, it's by far the most surprising and unexpected performance of Wiig's career. While Mother remains a fiercely polarizing film for many reasons, Wiig proved beyond any doubt that she could be a genuinely chilling antagonist with the right material. Jeff Bridges, The Vanishing. Jeff Bridges is generally cast as likeable, heroic characters, because that's just the vibe he so effortlessly gives off. His laid-back charisma has been his popular brand for decades. But Bridges did opt to play a rare villain role in 1993's remake of the legendary horror film The Vanishing. Here, Bridges plays Barney Cousins, a sociopathic professor who is responsible for the disappearance of protagonist Jeff's girlfriend, Diane. There's absolutely nothing charming or alluring about Barney. Both his superficial veneer of normality and the disturbing truth beneath couldn't be much further from the easygoing characters Bridges has spent most of his career playing. To his credit, Bridges acquitted himself just fine in the role, though this remake was a pale shadow of its 1988 predecessor, largely due to the decision to replace the original's bleaker-than-bleak ending with a happier, very, very Hollywood one where Barney is foiled and Jeff is saved. AnnaLynne McCord, Excision. Prior to 2012's Excision, AnnaLynne McCord was almost always cast as confident, badass characters where her good looks were placed front and centre. But in Richard Bates Jr.'s aforementioned horror film, McCord plays Pauline, a deeply disturbed teen who has bad skin, weathered hair, and poor posture to boot. Despite McCord being depicted as conventionally beautiful in just about every prior role, here she was given a firm dressing down to be as plain as possible. Yet it's really McCord's performance which truly sells Pauline as a twisted outcast, stripping away all the vivacity she's displayed elsewhere, trading it in for a more introverted, anxious, mousy type of character. Few casting directors would take a look at McCord's headshot and consider her a natural fit to play the weirdo pariah. But this only makes McCord's performance that much more startlingly impressive. Though Excision is something of a cult gem among horror fans, McCord's stellar performance desperately deserves more eyes on it. And finally, Leslie Nielsen, Creepshow. The late, great Leslie Nielsen had such a storied career that he managed to be cast against type in both directions. As a younger actor, Nielsen was known for his dramatic performances in films such as Forbidden Planet and The Poseidon Adventure, before being cast against type in the comedy Airplane, after which he firmly established himself as an all-time comedic performer in the Naked Gun franchise. Yet in 1982, just as Nielsen had cemented himself in the world of comedy with the TV series Police Squad, which was the precursor to The Naked Gun, he played a ruthless villain in the Stephen King-written horror anthology film Creepshow. In the story Something to Tide You Over, Nielsen plays a psychopathic millionaire who plots one hell of a nasty revenge plan on his wife and the man she's having an affair with. Nielsen is brilliantly ice-cold in the role without a fleck of wink-wink comedy, in turn demonstrating his underrated range as an actor.